Welcome to the Fleet Geeks podcast. We're here to help develop fleet and transport professionals. Do you want to progress and develop your skills and knowledge? We promise to bring lively conversation and debate around interesting issues and keep you bang up to date with changes in our awesome industry. The Fleet Geeks are a community of professionals, and if you enjoy the podcast, why not join the discussion for free in the Fleet Geek community over on Facebook.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Fleet Geeks podcast. Can you be a remote transport manager? The reason I've done this is because of this message right here, those of you that are watching on video. It's in one of Dimitri's groups, and Marcy Devlin kindly has asked, "Hi everyone, do I need to travel out to the companies I'm working for? I've recently applied to do training as an external transport manager in response to a job advertisement that says the following: being an external transport manager is a great part-time entry-level job for students or anyone else based anywhere in the UK. You only need to study for less than a month and pass an exam, after which you'll receive a TMCPC, Certificate of Professional Competence. Then you can easily earn around £2,000 or more per month for a few flexible hours of work, most of which can be done online from home." So, very interesting advert, interesting responses, actually, some really toxic responses in the group around those questions. So bit of an interesting query, really. Can you be a remote transport manager? And actually the advert itself doesn't say that you'll be remote. It does say flexible hours of work, most of which can be done online from home. So strictly speaking, an external transport manager, there is flexibility, isn't there? Because you might not need to go in every day, for example. So there is a level of flexibility. Okay, so that's point one. Point two is that I've got a challenge. So let's work our way through it. Being an external transport manager is a great part-time entry-level job for students. Now, it's really not an entry-level job, is it? Because a transport manager is reportable to the company directors and obviously the responsible person in the eyes of the traffic commissioner. So for me, it's really not an entry-level job. So wherever Marcy, wherever you've seen that advert, it's absolutely not, it's not an entry-level role. Okay, so I think we can all agree with that. It's not an entry-level role. It is a manager's role. You do need to be able to influence and have management of drivers. If you check statutory document 3 from the Traffic Commissioner, which I think has been shared in the chat, I think that's really, really important that anyone thinking of doing a transport manager role reviews that, because it states clearly the expectations. So it's definitely not an entry-level job. You only need to study for less than a month to achieve passing the exam. Actually, that's strictly speaking, that's true. Okay, so you could pass the exam in less than a month's study. The challenge is that actually the exam doesn't teach you how to do the job. So there's a bit of a tricky thing there, because the job's quite complicated. You do need to manage drivers. You're responsible for drivers. You need to manage the operators as well as an external transport manager. So it's really, really important that actually you have some knowledge and understanding of how the companies operate, and also the level of compliance as well. Because strictly speaking, the transport manager exam, you can pass the exam. It doesn't necessarily make you going to be a competent external transport manager. So that's certainly something to think about. You can easily earn around £2,000 per month for a few hours. That's actually true. Okay, so you can earn £2,000 a month. You can actually earn more than £2,000 a month. You could earn a lot more than £2,000 a month doing the role. But it won't be a few flexible hours to achieve that kind of level. Okay, so there is work involved. It's not an easy role, and it's actually pretty challenging, Marcy. So I don't mean to sound condescending or anything like that. Hopefully this is a valuable podcast for you, and once it's live, I'll share it as a comment in the discussion. But thank you for actually asking the question and helping me to come up with the podcast here around whether you could be a remote transport manager or not. So strictly speaking, a lot of the work of a transport manager can be done remotely. Okay, so there are jobs to do. Things like you could create safety information, you can create policies, you can create all kinds of documentation and process for your external transport management clients, and you could do that work remotely. There's nothing to say that you need to be in-house, so to speak, to complete that work. So definitely a lot of the documentation work can be done remotely.
Hello, it's Shani from Flagship Partners. We are really proud to sponsor the Fleet Geeks podcast. If you need expert advice or training for your fleet business, make Flagship Partners your first choice. We are really excited to announce the launch of our Transport Manager Academy. With expert development for fleet leaders, we offer fully accredited initial Transport Manager CPC training, CPC refresher, and operator license awareness training, as well as mentoring, support, and professional development beyond the qualification. Our vision is to develop elite fleet professionals.
Now, the other thing is if you get your operator to sign up to digital systems like our fleet support services or other tacho management systems, you can monitor all of the tachos remotely. You can monitor all of the daily walk around checks. You can monitor all of the defects. You can do all of that work remotely. You could also plan all of the maintenance remotely as well. So you can review service documentation remotely. Now, if your maintenance providers are only doing paper maintenance, then that might pose you a challenge. So there might be some challenges around working remotely that are going to be a problem for you. So it's really important that you can fulfill all of those objectives. Potentially, you could meet with your drivers remotely. Okay. Potentially you could meet with the company directors remotely as well. So there are things that can be done remotely for sure, but can you be fully remote as a transport manager? I'm afraid that's not the case. There is work that must be done in the operating center itself. So for example, you really need to make sure that gate checks are done, which is a way of making sure that you're checking that drivers are fulfilling their duties around carrying out their walk around checks. Okay, and really that needs to be done physically. Now, you could potentially get someone competent to do that on your behalf and feedback to you. So that's one thing. The other thing is to make sure that the drivers are doing the actual walk around checks, for example. Now, I think there are a lot of elements based on what I'm talking about here that could be done remotely. The other thing is you need to make sure that drivers fully understand and sign off on all of the policies, that you communicate effectively any changes to them or expectations or where they're not meeting expectations, and make sure that you've got a continuous and effective control over those drivers. Now, again, a lot of that work can be done remotely, but I think a lot of drivers are resistant to technology and meeting you remotely. And it's certainly something you can't really do just by telephone. Okay, so in answer to the remote question, I think a lot of work could be done remotely. I think you could be a really great transport manager remotely. However, I really think that it's unlikely that if you work remotely, I think it's unlikely if you work remotely that you can be an effective transport manager. I think that's the correct response. I think that you really do need to get in. You need to be involved to see the the company directors. You need to get involved and see the drivers. You need to get involved and see the work that's being carried out. You need to be checking competencies. You need to be having good conversations with people, because that's part of the effective, continuous and effective control. So in answer to your question, yes, a lot of the work can be done remotely, but ultimately I don't believe a transport manager will be successful without spending some time on site doing work, making sure that we're speaking to drivers, making sure we're communicating with them, making sure that information's shared, that training's carried out, that policies are set out, that everything's signed for and documented. I don't necessarily think that all of the work needs to be done on site. I think a lot of it can be done remotely, and obviously there's systems that help support that. So when people say that they visit their external transport management clients every week, then actually that may be overkill, but it may not be. It may be based on the level of risk that they deem appropriate for that operator as well. So I hope that's been helpful. And I know I've used a lot of mays and shoulds and potentials and everything like that. But ultimately, what you'd find is when you become an external transport manager, is that every operator is different and their needs are different as well. And what you need to be able to do is to be able to sit in front of the DVSA or the traffic commissioner at any point, and you need to be able to make sure that you meet all the criteria for an MIVR. You need to make sure you meet all the criteria for a TEVR or a desk-based assessment. And I think if you were to spend some time looking through those documents, for you to meet all of those criteria with your external transport management clients, I think you would see the level of work and detail that's required. You would also see that there's certainly some things that need to be done on site to help you facilitate that process, to make sure that you've got the effective documentation you need. I hope this has been useful. Thank you very much for listening. And I'm sure that people will have comments around whether you can be a remote transport manager or not. But I hope it's been useful. And I'll see you on the next podcast. Make sure you subscribe and see you soon. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please share with your friends and colleagues too. Join us for free on Facebook with the Fleet Geeks community for transport and fleet managers. Fleet Geeks offers ongoing professional development, networking and mentoring too. So get in touch with me, Pete Rushmer, on any social media platform to find out more.